Hi, I'm James Taylor.
And I'm Alison Burns.
And together we are
the Ethical Futurists.
Now, you're listening to the Ethical Futurists podcast, where we dive into the world of sustainability, ethics, and why these ideas today are more important than ever before. Now, join us as we engage with leading thinkers, with business leaders, with academics, with entrepreneurs, with investors, and change makers to uncover the latest ideas shaping a more ethical and sustainable future. We're going to be covering a lot of different things in this podcast as well.
We are indeed. From sustainability, innovation to future trends and ESG.
Our conversations span a wide array of topics, including renewable energy. We're going to be looking at clean tech, ethical investing,
food systems, and much more.
Yeah. In each episode, we explore really crucial issues such as carbon emissions, the circular economy. We're going to be talking about rewilding,
net zero carbon goals,
and the future of food and energy, something that Alice and I are really passionate about.
So whether you're interested in lab-grown meat, alternative proteins, sustainable finance, or climate-related risk, we've got you covered. Are you looking to secure a keynote speaker who's well-versed in sustainability, ESG, or any of the engaging topics featured on the Ethical Futurists podcast? Well, look no further. Connect with the experts at MENA Speakers to book your ideal speaker today.
Just go to mena-speakers.com. That's mena-speakers.com. Alternatively, you can drop them an email at book@mena-speakers.com to book the perfect speaker for your next event. Omar Saif is a multidisciplinary professional who has been driving sustainability and decarbonisation efforts within the Middle East for the past 11 years. Currently serving as a senior specialist at COP28, he focuses on brokering technology and innovation partnerships that accelerate climate tech deployment, especially in emerging markets. Omar's previous roles include working as a sustainability consultant at EY, WSP and SmartWatt. In these positions, he led and delivered diverse projects including energy management, GHG accounting, net zero, sustainability strategies, and ESG reporting. Additionally, Omar has played an integral role in government trade promotion efforts with the Dutch and New Zealand governments, focusing on the promotion of green tech startups and SMEs. Omar holds a Master's of Engineering and Public Policy, as well as a BSc in Environmental Science, both from McMaster University in Canada. Omar Saif, welcome to the Ethical Futurist podcast.
My pleasure to be here. Thank you so much for having me.
So share with us, what's going on in your world? What's currently got your focus at the moment?
Well, we just delivered, in my view, a very successful COP back in December, COP28. And, we, after all, I think a lot of us took some much needed time off. We're back in the grind. Now we're really focused on the delivery, a lot of the legacy items. So the things that were announced at COP, but, that we don't want to drop the ball on, and really make sure that we stick to those commitments and really see them through.
Now, Alice and I both attended COP.
Yeah, we did.
In Dubai. Amazing event. Very inspiring. I know one of the things you were involved in were a lot of the programs of talks that were going on there as well. So many different things.
Yeah.
So obviously you're moving to this kind of next stage. Kind of the COP, the actual event happened, but I'm guessing there's a lot more that's kind of still has to happen. There's this legacy, as you were saying.
No, absolutely. And I think even early on, we all recognized that with COP, that there's a strong legacy aspect to it. We don't want it to just be an event and that's all it is. I think we were quite blessed to have a really fantastic leadership that really saw the role of the private sector and enabling and kind of collaborating with the private sector. So that's something that we did very strongly. And I think quite early on, we thought of, what ways can we embed legacy into COP28? So it's not just strictly programming and having a great time at the event itself, but what things can be done to deliver. And I can give you some examples of that. So in the area that I'm currently working in, which is tech and innovation and entrepreneurship, our task was to really catalyze the climate tech ecosystem and bring all of those relevant players from across the world and really support in the deployment of climate tech in the global south, which traditionally has seen not as much support, not as much flow of capital towards the startup ecosystems there, although there's a growing amount of talent and developing ecosystems there. So one of the things that we're doing now is we launched at COP the Innovate for Climate tech initiative. And with this program, what we aim to do is have a coalition of various members, and currently we're at around 45 members that are corporates, SMEs, startups, VCs, really the full climate tech ecosystem representing global players. And what we intend to do is really focus on specific hubs in emerging markets and what we can do to support them from a climate tech point of view. And we're happy to say, and maybe this is something that it's nice to announce here, is that Abu Dhabi will be the first hub that we're launching. The reason being is because we see it as a great engine for the MENA region, where there's a very strong climate tech pipeline that's being developed, and we want to see that in a way cascade downwards into some of the peripheral markets like India, Africa, and the MENA region.
Amazing. And actually,
That's
this is our first season of doing this show as well. And before we came on, we were talking about where to go next, where to do season 2. And there's so many places, there's so many amazing things happening around the world just now as well.
Yeah. Well, what we're fascinated with is that you're keeping that going, you know, and it's a continuous, it's not actually just an event like you said. But what's interesting is what brought you to your involvement with COP28 in the first place?
I think, like all good things in life, it's an element of luck and just being at the right place at the right time. So I was brought into COP through a connection of mine who was an ex-colleague at Ernst & Young, and he's currently at HSBC, and his boss was the one that was seconded into COP28, director of partnerships, and it was basically through her that I had a very quick interview and then onboarding into COP28. But I think the real journey leading to COP is a bit of a longer one. I mean, I've been in the region for 11 years now. I grew up and did all my education and, you know, started my career in Canada. But I've been in the UAE for 11 years, starting in Masdar. I was working there as a research engineer, and then I went into consultancy. I did some trade promotion as well with the Dutch and the New Zealand governments. But throughout all of that, I think sustainability and decarbonization has always been a common theme. And I say this as almost, I feel like a veteran saying this, but 11 years ago, we were selling sustainability when most clients in the region didn't really know what sustainability was. So to see kind of full circle going back to, with COP28, seeing how much the region has evolved and how much they've really I think taken on the responsibility and the challenge, the climate challenge, I think is remarkable.
That's fascinating, because would have been able to see it along that 11-year continuum. You know,
coincidentally, and I think the funny irony of it is that in a way I started with Dr. Sultan Al Jaber as my boss back when I was at Masdar, and then having him back at COP28. So when I say full circle, in more ways than one.
That's amazing. And what would you say that you feel that are your top accomplishments within your role at COP28?
Yeah. So I think it's, given the breadth of what was delivered at COP, maybe I can just start there. We all worked on very different things. You know, we had a negotiations team that focused very much on the actual negotiations process via the UNFCCC, and then we had a non-negotiated team which I was a part of, which we were focusing on the climate action agenda, which encompassed various things, including climate finance, encompassed food security, water, nature, indigenous communities, and also the team that I was part of, which is the tech, innovation, and entrepreneurship. So I think the big win for all of us was definitely the UAE consensus, being able to move the needle and really bring on a lot of the major oil and gas companies and countries to really make a commitment to phase out fossil fuel. That's definitely a step in the right direction. And I would say even maybe don't hold me on this point, right? I'm a bit biased since covering the non-negotiated outcomes. But I think what we delivered in the climate action agenda was spectacular. And the reason being is that it really was the most inclusive COP, as Dr. Sultan promised it would be, because we engaged indigenous communities, we engaged youth, we engaged the private sector. I mean, we had people coming up to us and saying the green zone is amazing, it's spectacular. Although everyone was very skeptical in the beginning, and they were all approaching us trying to get tickets to the blue zone, which obviously we couldn't do. But to see that response and that, everyone, there was just this buzz and energy, and the private sector was just so involved. And I think to me, that was one of the biggest accomplishments, which is it really set a precedent for future COPs. And at the same time, I think we included a portfolio of topics that were never really linked to climate, although they're integral to climate. When we talk about food and resilience and fragility and indigenous communities, these are all real topics that are linked to climate, but traditionally, it's all been reduced to a common denominator of carbon.
Yeah. It was interesting because I think we met for the first time maybe 2 weeks or so, or 3 weeks before we were at an event, before COP28 really kind of started the event. And I was looking at you and thought, you weren't getting much sleep, I don't think, around that time. I think when I spoke to you, you were kind of surviving on caffeine at that stage.
No, absolutely. It was a really, really tough time. And it was a daunting task, right? And I'm just very happy to see what we were able to accomplish as a result of it. I still remember looking several months back, almost a little bit less than a year ago, where we were strategizing about what kind of things do we want to accomplish and deliver through, the tech and innovation team. And I remember we mentioned that we would love to do an accelerator that's focused on the global south, and we delivered that. Right, we had around 100 climate tech startups from all across the world, and many of them were actually able to come to COP, and we were able to bring them and exhibit their technologies. We mentioned that we want to have the best programming possible, and I'm happy to say that in the Tech and Innovation Hub, we delivered over 100 sessions across 10 days with really high caliber, top-notch speakers from CEOs to CSOs to entrepreneurs to NGOs. We really covered it all. And then we also were saying that we really want to have a lasting legacy when it came to bringing the climate tech community together. And we were able to bring on the right partners and launch the Innovate for Climate Tech initiative. So looking back, it's not every day that you set out, to accomplish specific things, and really you're able to reflect and be like, yes, we actually delivered on those promises.
Now, one of the things you mentioned there was about the global south, and I know that an area that you're really passionate about is building climate resilient infrastructure, specifically as it relates to the global south as well. So what are maybe some of the common misconceptions that people have about how that works and how it's done?
Yeah, so I'll share maybe a somewhat unpopular view on this, which is when we're looking at climate change, right? I mean, we can always dissect it into mitigation and adaptation. And mitigation, in a way, is a global issue, right? We want to reduce the emissions so that we reduce the overall warming within the 1.5 degree target. When it comes to adaptation, it's actually a lot more of a local issue, right? So the reason why I feel that, especially in the global south, I would love to see a lot of the solutions, the infrastructure, be more specified towards adaptation than mitigation. Because historically, if we're looking at it from an emissions perspective, they've had very little contribution to the actual emissions, but they're bearing most of the grunt of the climate impact. So for that reason, I would love to see more companies, startups in the global south that are actually focusing on adaptation rather than mitigation, because they will be the only ones who will develop solutions for their own local needs. You're not going to have solutions come and import it from abroad. They really need to localize solutions for themselves.
And I guess linked to that then is about the grid, about electricity power, about having that more as a distributed form of power as well. Can you talk about the kind of things that when you were working at COP28, and the kind of things that you heard in the areas of technology and innovation and partnership that you saw that really kind of inspired you?
Absolutely. And I think maybe to juxtapose it with the UAE, which is, by all means definitely a developed country, especially when we're talking about infrastructure, world-class infrastructure. In a way, for such an urbanized country like the UAE, the path that they've opted for is one of very large utility scale solutions, right? So whether it's on the renewable side, power side, water desalination side, etc. And in a way, what a lot of global South countries and communities need is actually quite the opposite of that, right? Centralized solutions, they have enormous capex and operational costs, and it's often too burdensome for those local communities or governments to really do centralized utility solutions. What you need is more of a decentralized approach, and this is not only for the power sector, but it applies even for water treatment, for whether it's water distribution systems, water treatment systems, irrigation. In agriculture also, you're not going to have large-scale farms. We're still talking about smallholder farmers that are operating in this region. So the kind of solutions really need to be tailor-made for that. And what we see in a lot of parts of the world is you do actually see this leapfrogging whether it's in the telecom space or in the energy space, where they're bypassing a lot of the bulky infrastructure that the developed countries of the world went and adopted. So on the renewable side, you see, I think, just a flourishing of renewable projects in Africa and Asia, where servicing specific communities, microgrids, etc., etc. And so the technology is there, and we know what a lot of the solutions that are needed. I think the major challenge and that I foresee for really deploying and scaling those climate tech technologies that are needed is on, one, the financing side. Two is also in terms of the price point, so related to the financing. But this also goes into the business models that are being done, right? Oftentimes you have solutions and products that are developed elsewhere, and then they're trying to be sold or implemented in the same way in developing markets. And in a way, you really need to repurpose them for those local markets, or think about how can we introduce more innovative business models that will actually work and scale in those regions.
And we definitely want to come back to that business model, because that's an area of interest. It's Alison and I, we're both from Scotland, or we spend a lot of time living in Scotland, and it's interesting because some of the things that you were talking about there, it's about the global south. I was thinking these actually relate to some of the rural communities in some of the highlands and islands parts of Scotland, where those large kind of very centralized projects just don't work. Yeah. And so now I see people then looking towards what's going on in India, some of the different parts of the world, to see, well, where are the opportunities? What can we be learning from these places?
And also as well, people often feel helpless. They say, well, what can we do? But if you can use you should scale down, or those technologies, like you said, leapfrog, to be able to make a difference without these massive big infrastructure projects going on, then you don't feel so helpless in relation to making a difference with climate change, and a difference to your own communities and how you live your life. And there's no doubt that there's been many studies that show that livestock farming in particular has a profound effect on greenhouse gas emissions. And so what would you say is your vision for food security for the future? And what would that world look like for future generations, especially the global south as well? Yeah, and it's a great question. So again, I'm just going to maybe take the example of the Middle East, and specifically here, the Gulf region. Looking at a lot of the food security strategies that have come out of here, and the overwhelming, I think, need for more diversification in the food products that are imported at the moment. Like in a lot of the Gulf countries, 90% of all foods are imported, right? And that obviously puts a certain burden and risk on these countries. And COVID was a great example of that, where a lot of countries had their supply chains really tested and pushed to the limits. So food security is critical, but at the same time, we have to define what food security is. If it's about full self-sufficiency, the fact of the matter, some regions in the world will never be fully self-sufficient and be able to meet the caloric intake and needs of their populations based on the current resources available, be that arable land, be that water resources, etc. The UAE being one of those places. So what food security is more about
also partnerships. It's about diplomacy oftentimes. So how can we work together so that if there are countries in the world that do have great agricultural capacity, well, how can we enable them to do it, maybe to even drive more production, do so sustainably, make sure that, the groundwater's resources aren't being depleted or being exploited beyond, their carrying capacity. So I really see it in a very holistic sense. Now, to your point about livestock, it's no doubt that when it comes to, as so many, I think, studies and so many demonstrations have put forth, if you're looking at the per capita or per the consumption of water per food product, right? If you're going to compare a kilogram of wheat versus a kilogram of tomatoes versus a kilogram of beef, yes, beef is overwhelmingly going to consume the most. At the same time, I'm a little bit skeptical of the notion that we should eliminate all livestock production. And the truth of the matter is, livestock production can actually be embedded and part of the ecosystem itself and be very beneficial to regenerating a lot of lands that have been eroded over time. And there's a great field emerging with regenerative agriculture that I think is really worth looking into. And there are some regions and some terrains that are ideal for that grazing kind of activities. But again, that will contribute a much smaller proportion of the meat that we would all want to consume. So definitely there needs to be a rationalization of our meat consumption. We need to bring that down. I think that's very, very clear. But I wouldn't say that we're going to have to go and completely eliminate all farms and all livestock. I think we just have to take a nuanced approach and really see what benefit there is to both from a human level and also to the ecosystems where these livestock are produced.
I think one of the things when we attended COP as well, which is what you were doing in creating those conversations that were going on around COP. For example, I know there's a big vegan section there, and which is great, fantastic, and just different food products. But for me, some of the most interesting sessions were around you had sessions around alternative proteins, and there were great speakers from different parts of here in the Gulf region. And there was a couple of things I learned that I didn't know about, and I was speaking about a month later in Riyadh for a company called Al Marai, big in food production. And I shared some of those things, and it was like, this is there was a lot of kind of questions that came from that. So we're kind of at this stage where we're going through an education process about some of these are technologies.
And hugely innovative as well. I mean, there's amazing innovation going on, and you have companies like Solar Foods in Finland. They're in Finland, aren't they? They're making protein out of thin air and microbes. It's quite incredible what's going on. So I couldn't agree more. And I think it's really important that you don't always lump all technologies in one bucket. So you'll find some people who are completely repulsed by the idea of alternative proteins, and then you have some who are completely repulsed by the idea of traditional dairy and livestock meat production. But the truth of the matter is that there are innovations that do well on both ends, right? And I think just like you mentioned, it was also eye-opening for me at COP. I was sitting in on every single one of those sessions and just learning and listening in. And it actually dispelled quite a bit of myths for myself that I had around alternative proteins, where I went in, a little bit skeptical and thinking that it's a waste of VC money and capital. And then I came out thinking, you know what? No, I actually think some of them are doing some really interesting and meanwhile work.
We had some of those discussions afterwards where we were talking about cultured meats. Alice was like, no, this is fundamentally no.
I don't want to go down that road.
I would try. This is interesting. And so I think you obviously your brief was around entrepreneurship, innovation as well. Can you tell us about maybe a key aha moment in your journey? You've gone through this incredible journey. I know you've worked with lots of different organizations, but a key aha moment in terms of your own sustainability journey.
Well, that's a great question. I think that takes me back to the time that I was working with the Dutch government, and I was promoting a lot of the Dutch SMEs in the agri-tech, water, and energy space in the Gulf region. And the challenge that I saw was that we were promoting these companies through very, I would say, traditional methods, right? So I went through a couple of iterations where we would have a trade mission organized. We bring these companies, we take them around to some major clients like DEWA, ADNOC, etc. You know, the big names that we have here in the UAE. And these are SMEs, right? So typically, out of courtesy, and you know, we would have those meetings, and they get to pitch their businesses to these big players. But did it ever really result in contracts? Honestly speaking, no. I don't think I can recall one case where it resulted in a proper contract. And the reason being is that, you know, everyone recognized that they were innovative and really solid companies oftentimes with really great solutions. But how you get them into the market is a completely different question, right? And this is what now, you know, whenever we talk and whenever I advise any startups or SMEs that are interested in getting into the Gulf market, and I would say any market for that matter, is you really need to understand what are your entry points and how much are you willing to invest in the region, right? If you're an SME that's based in Rotterdam, chances are you don't have a massive budget or workforce that's going to be able to open up offices throughout the world and do active business development everywhere. So, and that's fine, you know, that's where you currently are. What that means is that you're not going to be going and pitching to the end client directly. Rather, you have to use the right market mechanisms. And sometimes that may be agents, that may be distributors, that may be local partners that you have to go and find that can push those technologies and products on your behalf. And that was a bit of an aha moment for me, because when I did actually speak, especially in the water tech space, I spoke to various distributors and agents in the region. And I was shocked to almost hear that not a single Dutch water company or water SME was actually supplying tech to them. Although, you know, the Netherlands is very well known in the water tech space. So for me, okay, then this is clearly a gap in that we haven't been fulfilling in terms of trade promotion. So instead of, for all the future trade missions, what I really actively pushed for is, let's do a distributor mapping, let's do an agent mapping, let's identify who these middlemen are, who are the contractors that are winning a lot of the bids as well, to the likes of ADNOC, to the likes of DEWA. Can we become vendors or subcontractors to these contractors? So that kind of, I would say, approach was my aha moment. And I was very happy that, you know, when we did start to think in that way, we did start to see a lot more meaningful partnerships and I think partnerships with some of those distributors and agents where they were starting to push those technologies into the market.
Having that bigger view of partnerships. So, quick fire round, just as we start to finish off here as well. I'll let you go first.
Well, shall I go first?
Yeah, you go first.
Okay. Well, if you could recommend one book for our listeners who want to learn more about sustainability and climate tech, what book would that be, in your opinion?
So I would say one of the books that I read actually during my time at COP was Less is More by Jason Hickel. And the whole book is actually around degrowth, which is a very taboo topic, I think, and in the sustainability space. But for me, it was quite important to read it as I was going through the COP process, because I think, like any good professional, you always have to have an existential crisis about what you're doing, right? And while at COP, you know, I was questioning also, well, how much are these negotiations going to help? Are we doing the right things? Is tripling renewables going to solve things? Is doubling efficiency going to solve things? So it kind of led me to really want to dig deeper into what is the underlying issue behind a lot of the climate challenge, and I think a lot of the other social ailments that we have. And I found that this book was quite eye-opening for me. It was interesting. I don't necessarily agree with everything in the book, but I think the premise of questioning that growth imperative, and this is really the heart of the book, which is that, you know, we cannot, in a finite world, we cannot push for endless growth. You know, whether it's at a corporate level or an industrial level or government level, is that we have to work within the resources that we actually have. And I think that's quite common sense. You know, no one would say otherwise. However, our whole systems are designed in contrary to that. And that's the part that really sticks out in the page when you're reading the book, is that, you know, this makes sense. But then why is it that everything that we're doing, it's as if we're living in an infinite world? And I think that reminder was quite good, that at the end of the day, work as hard as we want on climate, the economics is really, really crucial, and it should be, I think, at the heart of future COP discussions as well.
And then what about a podcast? What would be if I go on your Spotify playlist just now, what are you listening to podcast wise?
Podcast wise, I'm a creature of habit, and I've been listening to the Freakonomics podcast for years. As someone who has a lot of various interests, I find that they really tick the box for me, where it's the economics of everyday things, and it's just every day or every week they're exploring a new topic, and I really love that.
And oldie and goldie there. And what about a website tool or a mobile app like Evernote or Gmail that you couldn't live without today?
Yeah, so my favorite app, it's more of a software that I've had on my laptop since I was pretty much in university. It's MindJet mind mapping. So I do mind maps all the time. It's very easy to use.
That's me. I'm with you on that. I'm on the mind
very
mapping.
Easy to use. I've even used it for COP, by the way, because I wanted to arrange all of the organizations and the partnerships that we've had, and who's doing what. And I find it very useful. In fact, I used to study using it all the time, where I would restructure all of the material that's in the book, but in how my brain processes it. And in doing that was my way to study, and it worked quite well.
Great. And in an ideal world, which we're never going to have, I'm sure, what does an ethical and sustainable future look like for you? Big question.
It is a big question. And I don't think any of us can say that we have the answer on our own. But I would say similar a little bit to the question about my kind of recommended book, is that I do want to live in a world where we're not constantly driving towards growth. I think it's exhausting, and I think people are exhausted. And you see this especially with millennials, and I think my generation and the ones after as well, is that it's not the profit. It's not just about profit anymore, right? People want to have a career that they find fulfilling. They want to be able to have time off. They want to be able to be close to nature. Everyone is apparently baking now at home since COVID.
Sourdough.
That's me. I'm the sourdough queen now.
Sourdough queens and kings. So I think there is this innate drive in a lot of us to get closer back to a traditional way of life. And I think the balance is somewhere in between, where we have to find a system where, there is advancement, there is innovation that's happening, but at the same time, you don't have to be stuck in a rat race, and you can actually just, relax, calm down, have cities that are community oriented, where you do know your neighbors and you are able to go out for walks and buy fresh produce from the local farmers market. So maybe my vision is a little bit more.
It sounds like more connected with nature as well.
It is. And
to be not just you have to be a part of nature as opposed to apart from it.
No, absolutely. And I think my secret is I'm explaining to you my retirement plan more than just the future.
But that sounds really good.
Well, before you retire, before you head off, what is the best place for people to go to learn more about the work you do, the organization, and to also connect with you as well?
So I think in a nutshell, if you want to visit and learn more about what COP28 is doing and some of the legacy items that are happening, definitely do visit the website cop28.com. And if you're interested in learning more about what I do, and especially in the climate tech space, best place to reach me is, I think, via LinkedIn, Omar Saif, easy to find, and I'd be happy to connect with anyone.
Well, Omar Saif, thank you so much for being a guest on the Ethical Futurists podcast today. We'll put all these links in the show notes so people can go to the ethicalfuturist.com and you can learn more about Omar and all his amazing work. Thank you, Omar, for being a guest on the Ethical Futurists podcast.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you so much.
We've put together a list of all the books recommended by our guests here on Season 1 of the Ethical Futurist podcast. To access the Ethical Futurist Book Club, just go to theethicalfuturists.com/books. That's theethicalfuturists.com/books. Now, if you decide to purchase a book through this link, then we're going to receive a small affiliate commission that goes towards helping to create future episodes of this podcast. Thanks for If you're considering making sustainability or ESG one of the themes for your next conference, your event, or perhaps a company retreat, then why not invite Alison and myself to be your keynote speakers or event MCs? We have delivered really inspiring co-keynote programs for some of the world's largest organizations from all different kinds of industries. Now, the Ethical Futurist keynote will take your audience on a journey to discover how the world's most ethical and sustainable companies are really innovating in their industries. So if you'd like to learn more about booking Alison and I as the Ethical Futurists for your next event, then simply head to theethicalfuturists.com/speaking. That's theethicalfuturists.com/speaking to schedule a call to discuss with us your next event. We're delighted that you listened to this podcast, and we'd really thank you if you could just take a moment now to subscribe to this podcast on your favorite podcast platform. Also, while you're there, why not give us a 5-star rating and leave us a review? It would really mean a lot to Alison and I. So from me, James Taylor.
And me, Alison Burns.
Thanks for listening to the Ethical Futurist podcast.